What's up, YouTube? It's the Action Figure Grader coming back to you with another video. I alluded to CGC's entry into the graded video game market a few days ago. CGC obviously grades comics. They certify collectibles like coins and trading cards and sports memorabilia, but they recently entered the video game market. And now looking at some of the prices for some of these auctions that are ending in a couple of days, I can understand why, and we'll kind of circle back to that towards the end of this video, so stick around. But I wanted to show you another website similar to Hakes that is out there that sells different collectibles that are graded or ungraded, but mainly graded, and that's CertifiedLink.com. comicLink is their original format, as you can see up here in the upper left. comicLink's been around for a long time. They've been around since 1996. But they have since the 2007-ish, they have since branched out into other collectibles, namely action figures and video games, trading cards, all kinds of coins, all kinds of different things, baseball cards, sports memorabilia. And so I wanted to show you guys this website because and give you a little details about it, and then also show you some of the video games that are ending here, and the prices just blow my mind. And just another example of the collectibles market for everything going up like crazy. And so we'll take a look at some auctions here soon. But just really quickly, CertifiedLink.com is the website. And it's really easy to register. I've already registered myself so I can have access to some of these items so we can take a look at them. It's very similar to Hakes. You just log in, create your account. You do have to link a credit card to it in order to bid. So I went ahead and did that, even though I'm not going to be bidding on anything. But I just thought you'd like to know how easy it is, but it took me 5 minutes to set it up. Just really quickly about Certified Link. Again, it's really came out of comicLink.com, which was formed in 1996, and then they moved into sportscardlink.com in 2007, and then they just created Certified Link. So Certified Link is kind of their catch-all for action figures and some of these other items that we're going to take a look at in the video game world. And that started in 2017. So they've been around for a little bit, but are fairly new to other collectibles other than comics and sports cards. And so that's kind of the quick background on them. A couple of things about that are positives and negatives. First of all, you do have to register prior to, as I highlighted here, and you have to link a credit card to it before you can bid. And the other thing I'll mention is that the buyers, like Hakes charges a buyer's premium for every item, and theirs is very expensive. It's 18% of whatever the final bid price is. You got to add 18% to that, and that's the final price. Now, Certified Link, their kind of marketing ploy is they have a lot less transaction fees. So the buyer's premium is only 3%, as I'm highlighting right here. So there's a 3% buyer's premium, as well as shipping costs and packing costs, things like that. But in general, I think the reason that, or the marketing, advantage that they have relative to Hakes and some of the others out there is that, their buyer's premium is a lot less. And it's going to be interesting to see as these games close up, or as these game auctions close up, how do those prices compare to Hakes? Because Hakes attracts a lot of big names and big money. And, I'm curious to see. I didn't know much about Certified Link until I received the email about this, and so I'll be curious to see whether the buyer pool is equivalent or similar to Hakes, and you start seeing some of the closing prices that we saw in the last Hakes lot number 232 that I showed you. So we'll see there. Now, according to their website, anyway, that there is a no return policy. So that's just something to keep in mind, is that if the item does get damaged in shipping, it might be a little bit more difficult to get your money back. And I don't know how that process works. I've never worked with Certified Link. David over at Comic Book Investments can probably speak to them because he's used comicLink for a number of years, I think. But I would assume that you'd have a little bit of protection if the item arrives damaged. But if you just have second thoughts, just like with Hakes, there's no return policy. So keep that in mind. All right, I pulled up a few different auctions that are active right now. I think all of these end on July 13th at around 8 or 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. So keep all that in mind if you're actually buying any of these things. I mean, I only have 2 graded video games, and those were just kind of items that I liked. But I did pull up a few different options, just search words, just so we could take a look and see what the prices look like for some of these. And the Star Wars items are actually some of the least expensive. They don't really have any original Nintendo Star Wars games or Atari games, which tend to command, a little bit more money. But they do have some really nice ones in here. There's a couple of Super Nintendo games in here. They've got Super Star Wars, Super Return of the Jedi, and Super Empire Strikes Back. All of those are at auction. The Empire Strikes Back one is really attractive. That one is a 95 plus mint by VGA. So, the big grading companies for video games right now are VGA, which is a subsidiary of Action Figure Authority, AFA, Toy Graders. So that's who graded this one, and the label's very similar to what we're used to with Star Wars action figures. But what an awesome item. 95 plus is the grade on that. And right now the bid's only $80. I mean, I'm sure that's going to completely skyrocket, but I thought that was a really interesting one. Now, the other big company is WATA, and we'll take a look at some WATA graded examples here shortly, WATA Games. And they have really, they're fairly new, really, but they've really kind of taken over in terms of the price points for these graded certified video games. And I've got a few examples here later on that we'll take a look at that are WATA graded. But, here's the number of other ones that are in this auction. We got Rogue Squadron, which is a GameCube game. Rogue Squadron 2, that's graded 90. There's Rebel Strike. That is for the GameCube. That's VGA 90. This is one that I almost picked up ungraded a few, maybe 6-8 months ago. But this is a game I have a lot of fond memories of. This is the SEGA 32X Star Wars Arcade. I loved this game when I was younger. I guess I was in high school. It was 1994. But this game was pretty fun, and it was for the 32X, which was a very short-lived kind of add-on for the Sega Genesis. So I love the box art on this one. It's got Darth Vader with the TIE fighter shooting at the X-Wing, and that's a game that I'd like to pick up sometime soon. Ungraded, I've seen these go for as much as like $200, so it's not, what I found with graded video games is that the really popular games, where there was a lot of them produced because of demand at the time they were released, those don't command the prices that some of the more random games do, where they had very low print runs, and when you look them up in the census for VGA, there's not many of them, especially if they're higher grade. And one of the complaints about WATA Games, which is kind of the new kind of leader in graded video games, one of the big complaints about them is that they don't really have a census. So you don't really know how many of them are at certain grades. And that's where VGA has a little bit of advantage, because in theory, their census has a little bit more detailed data in terms of which games are at which grade and how many of them there are. So a lot of graded video game collectors have complained, though, that given that WATA is the leader and the prices are crazy, you would think that they would have some kind of census so you could know how rare it really is at that grade. And I would think that they're probably going to add that soon, just given all the backlash they've received from some graded video game collectors, but maybe they won't. Who knows? And circling back to CGC's entry into the video game graded video game market that they just announced this past week. One of the comments that I saw in a lot of the forums and on Instagram and elsewhere is that they hope that CGC has a detailed census similar to what they do with comics, graded comics. Their census is very, very good and very accurate, very up to date, and it gives the number of the number of comics per grade, and also all the different variant covers and how many of those are graded, how many of them have been signed, the signature series, where they've been autographed by somebody and authenticated. So I would think that as CGC ramps up their video game segment, that they're going to add that census and appease a lot of people that are upset with WATA for not doing that. And speaking of WATA, here's another one right here, just really quickly. This is a WATA graded. This is how WATA graded games look like. They use a similar grading scale to what CGC uses for comics, the 9.6, 9.4, 9.8 type thing. So this one's an Xbox Star Wars Obi-Wan game. Seal rating A+, so they actually grade the seal and how good the factory seal is, the cellophane around it. And they got an overall 9.6, which is a high grade. And this one's current bid is $1, so it's still pretty cheap right now. I'm going to keep an eye on that one. I doubt I'll bid on it, but pretty cool to see that. So that's how their grading looks. It's got like a big kind of encapsulation on the top there. As you can see, it's a little bit different style, not quite as slick or as streamlined of a look as VGA offers with their grading cases, but WATA seems to be the kind of industry leader now, and given how new they are, it's really interesting how they grew it so quickly, and it makes you wonder how they did. And as comic book investments David mentioned during our last live stream, you wonder who they stepped on to get where they are today. And I don't know, I don't know anything about the graded video game industry, but it is pretty incredible how quickly they took over as the kind of industry leader with certified graded video games. So, but I wanted to show an example of what the WATA graded items look like. Me personally, I'm a little bit partial to VGA's format. I think that their format looks a little nicer, but I do like the fact that they grade those on a smaller decimal point scale instead of 85 plus, 90, 90 plus. They have 9.6, 9.4, and but I don't know how strict the grading is with WATA versus VGA. I can tell you VGA is very strict. I mean, if they're anything like their AFA with their Star Wars figures, they're easily the most strict when it comes to action figures and mint on cards. So I would think that the similar logic applies with their video games. But anyway, so that's what a WATA graded game looks like. So that gives you just a general idea of some of the items that are going to be closing on Tuesday evening. My guess is this video goes live Tuesday during the day, so you'll be able to take a look at these if you want. And I just pulled up some other random search terms. Here's some Super Mario related games. Dr. Mario for the NES is at $550. Super Mario World, a game that I played pretty heavily with my brother growing up. That one is graded 85, and that's at $1,200 right now at auction. So pretty incredible prices. There's some Game Boy games here. Some of those go for big money. We got Wario Land. That one is a VGA 95. That's at $1,100. We got Super Mario Brothers for the Game Boy Advance. That's at $850. So clearly the graded video game market is alive and well, and these prices are just more indications of just some of the crazy prices that people are paying for these games. And here's a Mario Kart Double Dash. That's at $1,100. So quite a few different Mario games. You can even get some sealed actual game systems, as you can see here. Mario Maker Edition. So very, very interesting lineup of just the Mario games. Just a massive number of them. Here's a Game & Watch system. This is an actual game system that's graded 95. That just came out in 2020, so it's a fairly new item. The bid on that one's only at $179, but I expect that one to jump just given how high of a grade that is. But I also looked up Zelda. There was 26 matches for this current auction, including some really cool minifigures that are used for linking to the game system on the Wii. 95 mint uncirculated. So really, really cool items. The current bid on that one is at $700. So pretty wild to see all of these grading games. I think I saw a loose graded Zelda game by WATA here, if I can find it. Here we go. So here's an example of loose graded games that they'll do as well. Similar to how AFA and CAS and UKG loose grade Star Wars figures, they also do it for video games. So this is a game that I loved very much growing up. And so this is Zelda with that gold cartridge. I had one very similar to this. And it's only graded 8.0, and the bid price is at $67, but it is kind of cool to see a loose graded video game. And what else? I pulled up Pokemon because everyone knows how crazy Pokemon prices are, as we saw in the last Hakes auction. If you went online there and checked out some of their items, they had an uncut proof sheet for Pokemon cards that sold in the $160,000 range. And here's some Game Boy games. This Pokemon Red version, that's a Game Boy game, 85 plus graded, that's at $5,100 right now. So all kinds of high prices for these Game Boy Pokemon games, and that was the highest of the bunch. But pretty crazy. Here's an example of a game I think that probably wasn't it was not produced in high numbers, so as a result the census of graded examples are probably pretty slim. I haven't looked this up on VGA's census, but I would guess that RoboCop, which was a terrible game, by the way, I played that growing up, I would guess that this probably had a pretty low census number, and given that this is 85 plus, it explains the high bid price, because it was not a very good game, but it's got some great art there on it. But it's 85 plus. I remember that game very well. It was just awful to play. And it's at $2,100 right now. So, Street Fighter 2 Turbo, a game that my brother and I played endlessly. My brother would beat me like a redheaded stepchild all the time in that game, and that one's at $1,400 right now. But the Street Fighter 2 series was awesome growing up. And there's that Legend of Zelda game again. So anyway, circling back to CGC, I want to talk a little bit more about why they entered the space. And I think that, people have asked, what are action figures next? And my guess is that's probably no, at least in the short term. I think that CGC looked at the two leaders right now, WATA and VGA, and they pictured this as a natural extension of their services, because the encapsulation for video games is fairly easy. They're square, whether they're loose graded like this, or they're sealed video game systems, or sealed video games, just the games themselves. They're just square boxes for the most part. They don't have a lot of encapsulation expertise that's needed for these. It's basically an extension of their comic grading, right? It's just square boxes. And so I think the hesitation for I think that they might have for going into the action figure world is that, number one, the barriers to entry are probably a little bit higher. You have to have, number one, a lot of expertise across every different toy line. And, the loose grading especially requires a lot of detailed measurements and encapsulation expertise. You guys have seen some of my really custom displays that I've done for my prototypes and for my loose figures. And I think that the profitability of that is probably not as high as something like video games, where you're just basically doing a square box for all these. The submission rate's probably going to be higher for these video games, given the values involved. The value to size ratio for video games is much the value to size ratio is much higher with video games than with action figures. It just seems like the prices on these video games easily reach into the stratosphere. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen in the action figure world. Of course it does, but it just seems like there's more consistent, really extreme high prices in the video game world, and it's much easier to capture that market, I would think, than veering into like action figures, where, in my opinion, AFA and CAS and UKG kind of have a stranglehold right now. I mean, there's other kind of smaller tier grading companies that are attempting to compete, but they're just not gaining any traction after a few years of trying to. So I think that's my logic as to why CGC entered it. It's just lower costs to encapsulate, higher volume, higher value to size ratio, so they can fit a lot of video games in there in their warehouses, relative to like mint on cards, and doesn't take quite doesn't take quite as much expertise to grade these types of items versus, a Hong Kong versus a Lily Letty versus a Spanish PvP versus a Sakara. There's just so many different variations as it relates to action figures, especially loose, that there's a lot greater chance for making a lot of mistakes early on than I think there is in the video game world. So it'll be interesting to see how quickly CGC can gain traction. I think a lot of it's going to be tied to, as I mentioned in the previous video, how quickly they can build up their expertise and how they can add staff that know what they're doing in this space. Clearly, WATA was able to do it fairly quickly, and CGC probably saw how quickly WATA was able to establish themselves as one of the industry leaders in the graded video game segment. And they said, well, if WATA can do it, and we've got the backing of Blackstone, who has $650 billion of assets, surely we can do it too. So I hope that you enjoyed this kind of this kind of look at the graded video game industry. Again, if you're interested in bidding on any of these items, you can go to certifiedlink.com and register. I think the auction's in Tuesday night, the 13th. So thank you so much for watching. I'd love to hear your comments below. Please be about the graded video game industry. Do you have any? Do you think it's an interesting kind of segment, or do you think that this is another collectibles bubble that will burst soon? So thanks again for watching, and I'll be back soon.